Thank you, Joe and Caroline. That was just beautiful. And thank you for joining us today. We are in the season of Lent as we journey towards Easter and resurrection, and we are spending these 40 days doing a new series. It's titled 40 Days of Growth, where every Sunday we're going to give you a spiritual practice that if you choose to, you can use to hopefully grow in your faith and your relationship with Jesus Christ. And so you'll get that again today. We'll highlight another spiritual practice. But let me begin by asking you this question. How often do you feel rushed? How often are you running behind? Or how often, maybe I can put this another way, does your to-do list of the day bleed over into the next day, and the next, and sometimes the next? Now, I know that we're in South Tampa, which means we're all busy. We're all feeling rushed a lot of the time. And I was reflecting this past week on whether I was too rushed, because I was thinking in my head of all the ways that I found that I was trying to save time throughout my days. I'm sure you do some of these. Like, I am never content just to drive in one lane. I'm always wanting to dart around, go between the cars, see if I can save maybe 30 seconds or even a minute in my commute going one way or the other. Or perhaps if you're at the grocery store, you've done this, where you've got all of your stuff in your cart, you've got your groceries ready, and you're looking at the checkout lines, trying to find the shortest line. And usually there's two that seem pretty similar. And so I go into one, and then I put my fictional shelf in the other line, so I can kind of watch and see how that person progresses. And it's a really good day when I'm walking out of the store knowing that my fictional self is still in that line. I'm going, I beat him by a whole minute. I just saved time here. But it's less good of a day if I see my fictional self walking out of that store and I'm still in line going, I picked the wrong line. Come on, David. What are you doing here? We are always trying to find time where to save time. And we, I think, probably feel very rushed in what we do. But there's a difference between just being busy, but still productive and healthy, and being overly busy, isn't there? Where having your busyness then affects your relationships, or affects even your health. There's a difference there. And so let's begin our time by looking at 3 ways to tell if you are overly busy, if you're overly scheduled in your life, if you've reached that tipping point of being good and healthy and busy to maybe, now it's affecting things in my world. Here's the first one. You know that you are too busy if you lose your sense of wonder about the day's events. Now let me unpack that. Here's what that means. This is the only life that God has given us to live in this sort of way. And so do you walk through your life with a sense of wonder and gratitude about the relationships that you get to have? Or about being able to go to school and learn and get an education? I mean, do you ever just marvel at the sense of, wow, God lets me do this. God made this entire world and I get to experience these things in it. Do you walk through your life with wonder? Or, if you're more like me, do you walk through your life going, I'm checking off my to-do list. Yes. I'm feeling good because I'm accomplishing things. I'm getting things done. When we lose our sense of wonder, maybe we're too busy or overly scheduled. Here's the second one. You are too busy if you have no energy for your family or loved ones at the end of the day. I'm guilty of this sometimes. If I've spent all of my energy during the day, whether that's at work or whether that's at school or whether that's doing different activities, and then you get home and you're just beat and you're irritable and you're feeling like my family or my loved ones are an inconvenience right now. I would rather just go into a shell and be, somewhere else. If you come home just exhausted, and this happens to us from time to time, but if it's consistent, if it's a pattern, then perhaps you're overly busy or too scheduled. And then finally, here's the third one. You may be too busy if you're thinking less about what God has in store for you that day and more about the things that you must accomplish. Because let's be realistic. When you go into each day, when you wake up every day, we could wake up with an attitude saying, okay, God, what conversations do you want me to have today? Are there particular events or interactions that I should be aware of today that are going to grow my character? that are going to make me more like Jesus. We can walk into our days with that attitude. But so often, we walk into our days going, I'm tired. Where's my coffee? What do I need to get done next? And we're just off and running, focused completely on the schedule and the busyness of our life. How are you doing? Are you overly scheduled? Are you too busy? Do you feel that you fit into any of these categories? Well, for many of us, the great danger is not that we'll lose our faith because we're too busy. No, the great danger is that we'll simply have a mediocre version of our faith because we're too busy. We won't have the time to invest because we're so distracted and rushed and preoccupied. We won't invest in the things that God really has in store for you and this life. But you know what? We're not unique in this. Jesus was very busy. In fact, Jesus was probably busier than any one of us here. I mean, imagine this for a second. Imagine that you heard someone from the town over, maybe Brandon area, could heal someone just by touching them or just by saying a word. Imagine you heard that. You'd go and see them, wouldn't you? I mean, you'd want to see for yourself. In fact, even if you weren't sick in that moment, you'd still want to go. Because chances are you know of someone, a loved one, who is sick and in need of healing. I mean, maybe you'd even bring that person with you. Say, come on, we're going to Brandon. I mean, imagine if you lived in a time period like Jesus, where there's no cars, no transportation, and you had to walk there. You'd still do it, wouldn't you? You would go walk over to Brandon to see, can this person really heal someone just by touching them or saying a word? Well, what we find when you read the gospel accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, especially the early portions of it, is that when Jesus would heal people, news of this spread like wildfire throughout the entire region. People wanting to see Jesus, to see if this was true and really happening in their world. And so our scripture picks up with this sort of event. If you remember last week, Jesus was baptized, and then he went into the wilderness for 40 days. Well, right after coming out of his time in the wilderness, he begins teaching, preaching, and healing. And so what happens in our story is that Jesus was teaching in a Jewish synagogue, so kind of like this, and then someone stood up and started yelling at Jesus because he was possessed by an unclean spirit. And so in that moment, Jesus healed him. And then our story picks up right after that. It says this from Mark chapter 1:27. They, meaning the crowd, were all amazed. And they kept on asking one another, what is this? A new teaching with authority. I mean, he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. And then pay attention to this next verse. At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. You see, at once, when people got news of what Jesus did, they began telling their friends, and their friends told their friends, and rumors of what just happened spread throughout the whole region. And then, as soon as they, meaning Jesus and his small group of disciples, left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon. This is Simon Peter, and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, so she's sick. And they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. Now at this point, don't you think that Jesus and his disciples are gearing up for a quiet night at home? I mean, isn't that what you would do? The disciples are probably thinking, we just had a full day. Jesus taught in a synagogue. He healed someone. Everyone's talking about this. Oh, let's rest. I'm curious what tomorrow holds for us. What will Jesus do next, right? That would be the natural thing to do. But the story of Mark continues in a different direction. Mark verse 32. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. Picture that scene in your mind for a second. What must that have looked like? I mean, the sun is setting over the horizon in the Middle East, and it's about to get dark, and maybe you're Peter, you're Simon Peter, and you are hearing some sort of noise from outside, and so you just go to your window just to take a glance out to see what you see, and, well, there's a crowd there. In fact, it's such a large crowd, it's like the whole city is there. The sick are there, and the loved ones who brought their loved ones who were sick are there. Friends who brought their sick friends are there. It seems like everybody has just surrounded your house. What would you be thinking if you were Simon in this time? Thinking, I did not expect all of these people to come tonight. Particularly, what would you be thinking if you were Jesus? Well, you got to think Jesus was tired. That Jesus was exhausted. That Jesus maybe said, guys, I will come tomorrow. Now is not the time. But instead, we see Jesus does this. Apparently, he goes outside, because in verse 34 it says, and he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Jesus has compassion on the crowd. In fact, he probably spends the next several hours healing the city, healing people of various mental and physical ailments. No doubt Jesus was exhausted. So Jesus can identify with your busyness. Jesus was busy, probably busier than any of us in the ministry that he was taking on. And yet, he found a way to stay connected to God and his faith throughout the busyness. And here's how. Verse 35. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up, went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. Where do you think that deserted place is? Maybe on a hillside, maybe just out under a tree. We don't know where Jesus went, but Jesus went and got some solitude by himself. He woke up early and just away from the crowds, away from the disciples, he left his house, found a place where no one else was, and spent some time in prayer, praying to God in that time. What we see is that this is a regular pattern for Jesus in the Gospels. If you look for it, you'll see this phrase over and over again. Jesus went to a deserted place and prayed. In fact, I'll give you a couple of examples. The night before Jesus chose his 12 disciples, he went and prayed. Now, you may not know this, but originally, early on in the Gospels, it was just a large crowd of people who wanted to be Jesus' disciples. It was a large crowd of people who were following Jesus because they were so mesmerized by what he was doing. But at some point, Jesus had to narrow it down. And he narrowed it down to 12 people who would then follow him for the next 3 years, people he could really feed into and train in leadership for those next 3 years. And so we see before he does that, before he picks these 12, in Luke 6:12 it says this, now during those days he went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent the entire night in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose 12 of them. We see this as a pattern of Jesus, not just for Jesus, but also for the people who followed him. Because once he sent out his own disciples, and he said, you go out and teach people. You go out and heal people. So they did. They left without Jesus, and they went to the surrounding cities, and they healed people, and they preached about the good news of the kingdom of God. And then when they returned, they were all kind of buzzing. They were all excited for what had just happened. And Jesus said, okay, let's go out to a deserted place now and get some rest. We see this in verse 31. It says, Jesus said to them, come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no time even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. So Jesus found value in solitude. Jesus found value in finding time by himself to reflect and to be with God. And there's a reason for this. It's not just something to check off in your box to say, okay, I spent time with God. My to-do list is done. But instead, if you're always moving forward in life, well, then you never have a chance to stop and look backwards and reflect on what you've just done. You can't learn from what has happened before you. And so what we see here is a spiritual practice that if we want to, we can adopt during these 40 days of Lent. It's a practice of self-reflection and solitude. It's a commitment to pray through your day, to look back through your day and say, God, journey with me through these events, my conversations, my interactions, and let me pray to you so I can hear more about what you would do in my life. Solitude and self-reflection is what we're after here. And so if that is of interest to you, if that is a spiritual practice that you would want to take on, here's how you do it. First, begin in this way. Identify the times in your day that you get a little bit of solitude. Because they're there right now. Maybe there's not a ton of them, but there are times in your day, maybe 2 or even 3 minutes, where you can be quiet. Perhaps that's in the morning, before the rest of your family has woken up. Or maybe that's after you've dropped your kids off at school. Perhaps it's during a lunch break, or a time when you can just close the office door, even for a couple of minutes, and just be quiet. The first step is identifying a period of little solitude in your day. Because chances are you can't find right off the top of your head a 20 or 30 minute time where you could carve out and say, this is my time of solitude. No, we live busy lives. But I bet you could find a small portion, a little solitude time. And then when you have identified that time, I would encourage you to try this. To say a quick prayer where you just close your eyes and say, Lord, I'm listening. Speak to me. And what happens when you do that is that your mind will automatically begin drifting to different events for your day. That's okay. Don't try to get refocused. Say, no, mind, I'm praying here. No. Let your mind drift, because your mind is going to drift to the things that are on your mind. And so when they come, pray for those times. In fact, when you're praying, when you're closing your eyes and reflecting in solitude, your mind might drift to a conversation that didn't go well during your day. Maybe it's a conversation with a friend or a coworker that you wished would have been better. Maybe it's a conversation with a spouse. During those times, it's not a time to feel guilty, but instead say, God, this didn't go how I wanted it to go. So I ask forgiveness, and I just ask that you can give me your power and your grace to do it better next time. Or perhaps when you close your eyes, your mind will drift towards something that is stressful to you, some anxiety in your life. And when that happens, even when your eyes are closed, your heart might start beating faster, and you'll want to just open your eyes and get to the next thing. But if that happens, simply say, God, I'm stressed about this. Let me give this to you. And you give over that stress in that moment, that anxiety in that moment. Say, God, please take this. Let me move on. Or maybe when you close your eyes, your mind will drift to something you're really happy about. Maybe a family member, a relationship, something that went well in your life. If that's true, just close your eyes and say, God, thank you. Thank you that I got to experience this. Thank you that this person is in my life. Wherever your mind goes, use that as an opportunity to know what to pray about. And then, when your time is up, just open your eyes. And you will be surprised how even moments of little solitude can make you feel more centered in your life. Because what you're doing is you're giving over your day to God. You're saying, every interaction I have, every portion of my day, God, I'm going to give over to you. And this is an actual practical way to do that. But I must say, we have to commit to finding the time to do that, because the world around us will not help us with that. In fact, the world around you is always going to seek to make you busier, to add one more thing to your schedule. That was just as true in Jesus' day as it is in our day. Because check out this next verse. So Jesus goes to himself and finds some time to pray. And then we're told this in verse 36. And Simon and his companions hunted him down. I want to say, guys, he's not playing hide and seek here. He's trying to get away from you. Give him some space. Jesus is trying to be by himself. But Simon and his friends go, no, we can't find Jesus. Let's go find him. Let's go hunt him down. And then I love what they say to Jesus when they find him. In verse 37, when they found him, they said to him, everyone is searching for you. And Jesus responded, I know, that's why I'm hiding here. I realize everyone is searching for me. At least that's what I would say if I was Jesus. Jesus is actually a lot more gracious than me, and so he responds in this way. He answered, let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came to do. And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. Okay, the temptation will be to fill every moment of your life with noise or distraction. But when we are not quiet or silent, we cannot expect to hear God speak. And so I encourage you in your day-to-day this week to find a time for a little bit of solitude and give that time to God in self-reflection on the day that happened before you. I'll give you an example of what that could look like. On Monday, I was near the end of work, and so I said, God, I'm just going to close my eyes. And I closed my eyes and said, I'm listening. Please speak. And I immediately my mind drifted towards my family. I think that's because I was about to go home, right? So I was thinking about what was coming next. And so I just said, God, thank you. Thank you for my wife and my 2 kids. And then I said, God, I also pray for patience because I could already feel that time. I don't know if you can experience this, but at 5:30 p.m. when the kids are hungry and you're just getting home, it can be a little bit chaotic. And so I knew that. I said, God, just give me patience. Let me be a good dad tonight. And then my mind kind of drifted to the things that were left undone still that day. And I began to get a little bit stressed. And I wanted to just open my eyes and finish those things before I went home. But I stopped and said, Lord, I'm a little bit stressed with these unfinished tasks, so I just give that up to you now. I just ask that you be with my anxiety and help me to commit tomorrow to have the focus to really get these things done. And I just tried to give that over to God in that moment. And then I opened my eyes. Literally, it only took 2 minutes. It was very short. But you would be surprised how centered you feel when you find times of little solitude in your life, to reflect on your day and to give that day over to God. I encourage you to do that this week. Let's pray. God, you often went to deserted places to find time alone to pray. May we follow in your example. May we do this same pattern because we need it. We will overschedule ourselves. We will make our lives extremely busy, but we also need to stop to reflect on your goodness in our lives and what you're doing in this place. So help us find the time to do that this week so we can continue to journey through life with you. Amen.